Jayant Haritsa as the speaker of the invited talk. Again, I put down the text, so I'm reading from my phone, but at the end I'd like to add a personal note on what I said. So let me introduce Jayant. Jayant is one of the leading figures of database research in our community, and for more than 3 decades, he has really helped shaping our field in various directions, mentorship and also community leadership. We see it more than ever in this conference, right? And he's also has been building really our vibrant database community inside India, but also outside India, so internationally. Jayant has been the faculty of the Indian Institute of Science since 1993. He received his undergrad degree from IIT Madras and then joined University of Medicine, Wisconsin for his PhD program. He was working with Mike Carey and Marion Livni. During his career, he also spent sabbaticals at Bell Labs, IBM Research, and Microsoft Research, showing his importance to the field and also his contributions to the field. Jayant is an ACM and an IEEE Fellow, a winner of the prestigious Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Prize. Sorry for that, it's hard to read. And he's also won the Infosys Prize for Engineering. He served our community in many leadership roles, not only in the SIGMOD role that he is in today, but also as a co-chair of VLDB 2016 and ICD 2010. He's president of the ACM India Council, and now he's the general chair of SIGMOD 2026. So what I particularly enjoy about Jayant are 2 things. One is something that I got to hear about, and I'm kind of wondering if this happens today. So despite that his heart is really into databases, he loves to integrate cricket in some way into his talk. So let's see if that is happening today. I have no clue. And the second point is he's not only into sports, but he's actually into arts. And that now Jayant might say, Carsten, what are you talking about? But actually, if you think about who really brought Cubism into the world, it was not Picasso, it was Jayant. And for those who don't know what I'm talking about, I'll explain it in a minute. So what this means, so he's been pioneering our field in many directions, and one was actually the Picasso Query Optimizer visualizer, which visualizes plan choices. And at the end, the plan choices look like Picasso images, and therefore the relation to the work of Picasso. And I actually like some of your drawings much better. Good. But he has also worked on other directions, on robust query processing, and has invented techniques that we know as plan bouquets. And what maybe connects us most is a work where I did my PhD in, and Jayant has also done several papers in this direction, and this is actually making the area of database testing and test data generation, actually establishing that as a direction in our community as a new research direction, which was before he worked and we worked on that, was not seen as a research problem of the community. So beyond all this, I also, again, a personal note, Jayant is really one of the most humble people I met and I know. He never puts himself into the first place. He always tries to help the community, and he was always there in the background just to solve things, working until late night, and even telling me when I was sending WhatsApp messages in the middle of the night, and this holds also true for Sudarshan, Carsten, stop. And therefore, thanks also on that, and it just tells a story how important not just he sees himself, that is what he's not doing at all, but what he's doing for the community. And this is also reflected in his talk title. Today, Jayant will speak on the Indian database research, the journey to SIGMOD 2026. And a few people have a better view on that journey and contributed more to it than Jayant and Sudarshan. And please join me in giving a really warm welcome to Jayant Haritsa.
Thanks very much. Is this on? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Carsten, for that very warm and emotional introduction. And good afternoon to all of you. the PC chairs, when they wanted to identify a speaker for this session, issued a very simple SQL query. Find a guy who is more than 60 years old, and more importantly, is guaranteed not to have any visa issues. And that's how I came to be here on the stage at this time. So, this conference, as all of you would know, marks a historic occasion for all of us here, since this is the very first time that SIGMOD has been held in India. So, I thought it would be both interesting and instructive to present to our international guests, as well as the youngsters within our own national community, tracing of the evolution as to how a country that was pretty much a non-entity in the database arena has over a few decades actually come to the situation where the international database community is willing to trust its favorite child, that is SIGMOD, to our care. And we are really grateful for that, and we hope that we have reciprocated that gesture by doing a reasonably good job of it. So I did a little bit of research as to where are all the countries where SIGMOD has been held. This is the 52nd SIGMOD. And you'll see that the vast majority is in the North American continent, 39 times in US and 4 in Canada. And if Canada becomes the 51st, then it's 43. And then you see that everybody else is in single digits here. And what really surprised me was that even a country like Germany, which was always been known to be a powerhouse of database research, especially with regard to development of core engine internals, only got its first SIGMOD last year. So we are in very good company now. What is also very interesting is which are the countries that are not represented here. You don't have the United Kingdom. And more importantly, you don't have Italy. I'm sure the situation will change soon. The president-elect of ACM is Italian. The chair of the SIGMOD Executive Council is Italian. You can do the math. And in 2029, it will be actually held in Rome. I had a sneak preview of Angela's slides, so I realized this. Okay? So what I'll try to do is to look at 3 different aspects with regard to database research. One is in Indian academia, the other is in Indian industry, and the third would be with regard to deployment in public spaces. So the foundations of both database teaching as well as database research were done by stalwarts like Professor Nanlal Sarda and Professor D.B. Phatak, both of IIT Bombay, and we are delighted that both of them are here. So I just request them to please stand up. And both of them are hardcore database researchers, but we also had database research going on in a few other institutions. But for these faculty, databases was more just like Gustavo Alonso, one of the many things that they were doing. Okay? So we had Professor Arun Majumdar at IIT Kharagpur. Then we had Professor Veni Madhavan at IISc. All of you know Lax Lakshmanan. He was Lax's advisor. Okay? And then we had D.K. Subramaniam and Lalit Patnaik at IISc. But this transition from having a national footprint to actually getting some degree of international visibility happened in the 90s. And that was due to the return of a few young Turks, young at that time of course, back from the top database system school in the world, University of Wisconsin-Madison. There are a lot of badgers here. Badgers here, right? So Seshadri and I came back in 1992. Seshadri was Jeff Norton's students, and as Kasim mentioned, I worked with Mike and Miron. And I came to IISc. A few years later, Sudarshan also joined and made it a trio. He came to IIT Bombay via a stint in Bell Labs. A few years later, another researcher from the Wisconsin of California, sometimes known as UC Berkeley, also came and joined us. This is Sunita Sarawagi, who was also here in this conference. And I think if Sesh is here, he was here the last couple of days representing Aerospike. If he's here, I'd like to have him stand up. Okay. Yeah. So this was the Young Turks. But then we are really fortunate to have Professor Kriti Ramamritam, who was a legend at that time itself in both the real-time and the database arenas. He also returned after about spending a couple of decades at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and he also joined IIT Bombay in 1998. And again, we are very happy that Kriti took the effort to come from Chennai and is with us here. So I'd again request Kriti to please stand up here. So we supplied the energy, he supplied the direction and the experience. So we had excellent mentorship to ensure that we stayed on the right path. And what I should also mention here is that at that time, although today you find that there are many researchers coming back from other countries back to India, at that time this seemed to be a rather bold move, and most of our mentors actually suggested to us to not do this, saying that if you go back to India, your research would die. So when we came back, we realized that was well meant. It was not that it was anything else, but we also felt that we had a commitment that we should try to ensure that that prediction doesn't come true. So Sesh, Sudarshan, and I always felt that we should continue to maintain this international visibility, overcome these hurdles, and put India on the world map. So that was the kind of commitment that came into it. So now you might be wondering, what was the footprint that Indian academia had with regard to papers in the SIGMOD PODS conference until 2000? There were exactly 7 papers, okay, and they're all listed here. The first paper is from a very unlikely location. This was from the National Center for Software Technology, which was part of the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research in Mumbai. There was a person called Mukul Sinha who's doing his master's there, and he did that with 2 IIT Bombay faculty. They never wrote a paper again in databases in their lives. This seemed to be a one-off case, but still they essentially laid the first time that a paper with Indian authors had actually figured in SIGMOD. Then subsequently, in 1993, Sesh had a paper in PODS. This was with a collaboration of the group at IBM's Almaden Research Center. You will recognize most of the name, Peter Haas, Jeff Norton, and Arun Swamy. And then in SIGMOD 1997, we had 2 papers from our Indian Institute of Science, which appeared in the conference. And there's actually an interesting anecdote related to this. I was told by one of the PC members that when these papers were being evaluated, and one of the PC members was recommending that these papers be accepted, several of the others actually objected and said that you shouldn't accept these papers. And the question was, why was this so? And they said that these guys don't even know how to write their zip code properly. So what had happened is that the Indian zip code, which is called PIN code here, is 6 digits long. The US zip code is 5 digits long. So there was a natural implicit assumption that all papers would usually come from the US, which was largely true at that time. So they were saying that once you have 6 digits, these guys are obviously drinking something, or how could they write good papers? So it had to be then explained, saying that, oh no, these guys are from India. And apparently the PC chair was extremely surprised, saying, who are these guys? Where did they come from? So that's the level of disconnect that we had at that time, which kind of epitomizes that. And then in SIGMOD 2000, there were 3 papers. Sudarshan was the hub there, and there were spokes in multiple directions with both Sesh and myself. So there was some now traction that there was a regular visibility of Indian researchers, not as frequently as you would like, but sporadically this was happening. So now, if you look at 2000, virtually all database research of at least international caliber was being done in exactly 2 institutions here. So this is IIT Bombay here, and then in our Indian Institute of Science. So the question is, what has happened in the last 26 years now? Has this situation changed? And the good news is that if you look at it today, the circles that you see are locations from which there have been SIGMOD papers in one form or the other over the last 25 years. So now you can see that there is a much larger spread, very similar to the dances we saw yesterday. Every state is now dancing on its own, and you see that there is several locations from where there has been participation in the SIGMOD program. And you might find something really surprising here. Even probably the Indians in this audience would not recognize this. Would you recognize where this green circle, which is also a SIGMOD paper, where does this come from? Okay. Those who are from Madhya Pradesh may have an idea. This is not the well-known Bhopal or Indore, which everybody is familiar with. This is the third largest city in Madhya Pradesh. This is not Gwalior, Jabalpur. This is from Jabalpur, and it is from an institution which has an incredibly long name. PPDM-IIITDM. Pandit Dwarka Prasad Mishra, Indian Institute of Information Technology, Design and Manufacturing. I think they ran out of things after that to add because it does pretty much everything. This is completely unheard of, and this was a full paper in last year's SIGMOD. Okay? Also in this SIGMOD, we have papers from this location, which is in Telangana, not Hyderabad. Any guesses? Warangal. Yes, Warangal is very good. And the last one is here. It would make Mohan very happy because this is a paper from the place where Mohan was born, which is Vellore. This is from the Vellore Institute of Technology. We have a paper in the SIGMOD workshop. Okay? Right. But so if you look at all of this now, you also see that there are certain larger circles here that symbolizes there are multiple institutions. So in Hyderabad, we have IIT Hyderabad and IIIT Hyderabad. And in Bangalore also, apart from IISc, we have the IIIT Bangalore. Okay. So all these people have made a variety of contributions to database research in many different forms, both with regard to core internals as well as knowledge graphs, information retrieval, and so on. But I think some of the really influential work has come specifically in the area of relational query processing. So I'll just focus on that for the rest of this talk. And the reason that I'm highlighting these projects is that it was not that they were basically following up and carrying on work that had already been defined by somebody else. In most of these cases, they were actually defining new research directions. So in that sense, there was an ownership and a leadership that was evinced. I hope you'll forgive me for saying that for a personal work also, but just trying to lay the land. So the very early work on making multi-query optimization practical came from Sudarshan's group here in 2000. And they were the first to show that how by using a variety of greedy cost-based heuristics and notions of shareable nodes in the plant tree, as well as certain benefit monotonicity criteria, you could actually make multi-query optimization, which had been theoretically analyzed, to be implemented practically. Okay? And this has had a huge impact subsequently on the field. Then Karsten already talked about our effort of being artists. So we introduced this notion of plan diagrams, which try to capture what are the different choices that a database query optimizer makes over the selectivity parameter space. So here is a sample picture that you see, where the x and the y-axis are basically the parameter space, and the different colors symbolize different plans. So you have a red plan, a yellow plan, a blue plan, and so on. And when we did this, we found that they looked surprisingly, with some degree of imagination, they looked like cubist paintings. Therefore, we called it as Picasso. Otherwise, initially, I wanted to call it M.F. Hussain or Ravi Verma, which were the Indian painters. But once we saw this, we said we had no choice. We have to call it as Picasso because the pictures look so much like the cubist forms of painting. So we spent a lot of effort on this for about 10 years, and this was taken up and received very well by both academia and industry. Another very nice project from IIT Bombay, which was again spearheaded by Sudarshan, was saying that, see, Gustavo was complaining in the morning, saying that you are having a very narrow vision, that you should be looking at end-to-end, and even Jagdish mentioned this, saying that look at the application, don't just look at your internal algorithms. So they actually did this. They looked at a holistic optimization of database application end-to-end. So they also looked at how do you batch the queries together, how do you send them over the network, how do you do prefetching and caching for all of them. So some very nice techniques were used. They also tried to make this effort of converting imperative code into declarative statements so that those statements could also be optimized by the query optimizer. So this is a very nice project, started in 2008, and this was called as dbridge, and it has actually had an implementation subsequently as well as in commercial products. Then Carsten also mentioned that query testing is something that is extremely important but largely neglected by the community because somehow everybody feels that, oh, I am the coder, the other guy is just the tester. So we have this unfortunate pejorative association with database testing, but actually designing database methodology, and Carsten did that in his thesis also. He did this reverse query processing work, which with inventing a new algebra called reverse relational algebra, which was really a very cute idea. So we had also spent time on query testing here. And this was another related project was again at Bombay. They introduced this X-Data project, which is to test for database query correctness, not by just doing a logical evaluation, but by creating small data sets and running it on them and seeing whether they would show up any mistakes or not. Okay? So the longevity of this project is shown by the fact that they also have a paper in this SIGMOD. 16 years later, the project is still going on, and they're making very good ground on that. So this was, I think, in yesterday's session, R17. Okay? So, and the other beautiful work that they did was, they said that, okay, if I say that the query is incorrect, and often in India earlier, the grading mechanism is that either you got the full marks or you got 0. It was basically digital marking, 1 or 0. But they said that if I made only a small mistake in the query, but compared to the instructor's query, most of the rest of it is right, then I should give you some partial marks. So they also went into this notion of grading and saying that how far is one SQL query, which is mildly incorrect, from the, in a sense, the original or the ideal query here. Okay? Then in our own lab, we started looking at robust query processing from around 2014. And this is the plan bouquet system that Carsten already mentioned. So what I will do, and the goal here was that, can you give quantitative performance guarantees about database performance? And this is what I'll focus on for the next segment of the talk. Okay. The reason I highlighted this is that yesterday somebody asked Tova the question, saying that do you see any field where machine learning in general and LLMs in particular do not beat existing database technology? Robust query processing is the answer. Okay? Here, traditional Euclidean geometry coming from 2,000 years back can beat ML. Okay? And what I'll try to do is to convince you of this claim over the next 15 minutes. Okay. So what is the situation in the real world? We think that we get optimal plans from the query optimizer because it does this cost-based evaluation over an exponential space using dynamic programming and various statistical models. But whatever was supposed to be at compile time the optimal plan choice actually often turns out to be highly suboptimal. And when we say highly, it is in terms of exponents, 100 times worse, 1,000 times worse, and so on. And you might wonder, these guys have been working on this for 50 years. How is it that you're doing so badly? The reason is that there are two statistical models that are the input to the database query optimizer. One is the operator cost model, but this has only a limited effect. And the other is the result cardinality, that is the output of the operator. This is the cardinality model, which can be really large. And if you don't trust me on this, I thought there was a beautiful sentiment expressed by Dr. Guy Lohmann, who was essentially the father of the DB2 query processing system. He wrote this in 2014. It's a long rant, the same way that Gustavo did this morning, saying that everything is wrong with you guys. Okay? It's a beautiful article to read. It makes you very humble very quickly after that. Right? So he wrote a post on is query optimization a solved problem? And there's a particular paragraph there that I always have loved. He writes in very colorful language. The root of all evil, the Achilles heel of query optimization is the estimation of cardinalities. And then he says the cardinality model can easily introduce errors of orders of magnitude. Okay? So when database people get it wrong, we get it spectacularly wrong. Okay? We don't do minor mistakes. We do huge mistakes. And then the last two lines are remarkably cynical. He says that with such errors, the wonder isn't why did the optimizer pick a bad plan? Instead, the wonder is why would you ever get a decent plan? That is, you must be remarkably lucky to get a good plan. So, okay, so then if you look at the prior research in the area, there has been tons of it to address specifically this problem. And you can see the different trajectories that have been used, or the styles of approach to this problem that have been used. One was to say that let's go beyond histograms, which are just piecewise linear approximations, to do more sophisticated mathematics. And there are again several papers in SIGMOD, VLDB, CIDR, and so on this. Yet another approach was to say that let me pick query execution plans that are to some extent robust to these errors, in the sense that they don't get hugely affected by some errors in the cardinality estimation. And again, there are lots of papers on it. The last approach was what was called as dynamic plans or runtime reoptimization, where you say you take the original plan from the query optimizer, start executing it, and keep monitoring it and try to compare what you get with what you thought you would get. If they're similar, you just keep going on. But if there's a big discrepancy, that is, you opened the tap and thought you would get a few drops, but you got a tsunami instead, then you say that there's a big discrepancy. Let me go back to the drawing board and do a replanning of this query. But when I do this replanning, now I know the information, which is not an estimate, but an actual value. So hopefully the new plan that I'm picking up would be better. So this can be an iterative process where I keep removing the errors by getting the actual values. Here also you would see several papers, including Mike Stonebreaker in ICD 2019. So these are all great ideas. And since I had initially removed some of the names here with regard to the association that you can make with cricket, but because Karsten already mentioned that, so at least for the home audience, this is VVS Lakshman. So this was a very stylish batsman in Indian cricket. Selection of stable plans, Rahul Dravid, the wall, was to do well on any pitch. Runtime reoptimization, Mahendra Singh Dhoni, can adapt on the fly. Okay, that's it. So, all these are great ideas by all the leading lights of our community, excellent theoretical analysis, great results, and so on. But fundamentally, despite all this work, you always had to cross your fingers, cross your toes, whatever else you could do, pray very hard, because they were not provably robust. So what has happened in the last decade? The rest of the world went with learning techniques. And as Gustavo said, machine learning, machine learning, machine learning, right? Everybody did that. Okay, I can't do it as well as him. So they all said, replace coarse parameterized models that you have with fine-grained learned models. System knows best. And there's literally, again, a tsunami of papers here. There's a tutorial that I had, which I presented in 2019 ICD and 2020 VLDB, which lists all the references here. We decided to follow a different path at the Indian Institute of Science. Okay? Primarily because we knew that we could not catch up with the rest of the guys, so we said we have to follow our own approach. We started saying that let's use geometric techniques instead. So basically leverage the trajectories of the plan cost function, and I'll explain this in the next slide, over the selectivity parameter space. And curiously enough, this has been a popular tradition in Indian academia, okay, by completely different groups. Sumit Ganguly at IIT Kanpur, who is also Avi Silbashat's PhD student, looked at this from a bottom-up approach, saying that how do I create a database query optimizer that does everything mathematically correct? Sudarshan and Aru Hulgeri also looked at this notion of parametric query optimization, where you look at saying that if a plan is ideal at this point and at this point, then you assume that on the line joining them, on straight line joining them, you can interpolate that the same plan is ideal even there as well. Okay? So this had a good tradition here. Now let me just, before I go on to how we address the problem, let me just show you what learning techniques are there. So this is a sample performance. On the x-axis is the number of joins in the query. On the y-axis is the Q error, which was defined by Thomas Newman and Guido Marcotte, which basically says that the number 1 is the ideal here, that you should get an estimate of 1 here. If you go up, it's an overestimate. If you go down, it's an underestimate. And notice that this is on a log scale. So if you look at PostgreSQL, this box plot shows you that often Postgres does severe underestimation of the database selectivities or cardinalities. Okay? That's the overall message here. So there was a paper in CIDR 2019, which essentially jump-started this field, which was this multi-set convolutional networks. And if you look at the performance here, the corresponding performance, you see that ideally you want a flat line here at 1, which would be the ideal, where you have made no mistakes at all. And although they're certainly doing better than Postgres, you still see that as the number of joins increases, then you find that there are serious errors. Look at this median point here that is close to 100. Okay? So you have improved, but you are still not robust. Okay? So now let's look at how can geometric techniques help in this situation. So I think we can apply what I like to call the laws of data on plan cost functions over the parameter space. So for example, one property that you could think of is monotonicity, saying that as you go out in the parameter space, that means that you are putting in more and more data into the query, then more data should imply more cost. This does not necessarily always have to be true because if you have negation operators and so on, but in general, 99% of database queries will follow this, that if you give it more data to process, it takes more time to do it. And also that it would have a smooth differentiable behavior. The second is that we would expect that this plan, and here I've shown this, so this is the space, this is the plan cost function, that this would essentially have a concave shape. That is, there are diminishing costs for each additional tuple, and the nice thing about submodularity is that it is closed under linear combinations. The third property you could think about is bounded growth, that this does not take off like a space shuttle, but has a more gentle curve in moving here. So you can put a limit on the function slope at the rate at which the plan cost function behaves over the parameter space. There are some other geometric properties also you can look at, but in the interest of time, I'll skip this. But basically what we are saying is don't look at the plans themselves, look at the plan cost functions behavior and see whether you can do something with those notions. So this led to what we call as the plan bouquet algorithm, which first came out in SIGMOD 2014, and then there was a Todd's version of it a couple of years later. Our premise here was that everybody had still been trying to fix the selectivity issue, saying that I must estimate selectivities, and I do better mathematics, or I do more stable plans, or I do dynamic reoptimization, but I must estimate. And what we said is that selectivity estimation problem cannot be solved except by Rajnikant. So for the benefit of our international guests, Rajnikant is one of the greatest heroes of the Indian cinema, especially with regard to Tamil movies. And he is the only person in the world who has counted from 1 to infinity 2 times. Okay? So if you want to get an equivalent, he's a combination of Arnold Schwarzenegger, Clint Eastwood, and Elvis Presley. Okay? So he has this larger-than-life image, which is very popular here. Okay? So most people refer to him as Rajani Sar. Okay? Okay, so now that we established that selectivity estimation is a brick wall that you cannot go through, you need to go around it. So we said that forget it, don't even try to estimate. Instead, come up with this new processing technique that abandons this process and do runtime discovery of the query selectivities using a compile time selected bouquet of plans. So you don't use one plan, but you do a suite of them. And interestingly, with this, you can show that you can actually provide worst case performance guarantees. And it's very important that this is in comparison with regard to the ideal. Because what I see in many of our database papers is that people always compare themselves with SOTA, that is the state of the art, which is in a sense a lower bound. But what is really, I think, important for the long term is to compare it with the upper bound, which is the ideal here. So we are going to compare it to the ideal. And the ideal is an optimizer that magically knows all the correct selectivities. So we can actually show, for example, for a single error-prone selectivity, you can get a relative guarantee of 4. That is, compared to the ideal, we'll always be within a factor of 4 of that. Okay? And I'll show this to you in the next couple of slides. And what is more interesting is that, although this is the theoretical guarantee, empirically this is often well within these bounds. So it'll be of the order of around 2 or 3. Okay, so let's work through this. So here is the parametric optimal set of plans picture for this query, where you are taking the name and the title of from a student database, where you have student, course, and register, and you are trying to find out all those students who are registered for courses where the fees of the course is less than some parameter $1. So if $1 is small, it means that you're looking for the cheap courses. $1 is large, it means that you're taking most of the courses. So by using this parameter here, you can control the selectivity of the course relation. And that is what you see on the x-axis here. This is a selectivity of course. This is on a log scale going from 0.01% to 100%. On the y-axis, what you have is the estimated cost of the optimal plan as decided by the database query optimizer. That is also on a log scale, goes from 6,000 all the way to around 6 million here. So this is the profile of the optimal plan cost for each of these selectivities here. But it's actually composed of different plans along that the trajectory. So for example, here in the initial part, you find that this is the ideal plan where you are having a nested loops join of course with register and then with student, and this makes sense because the amount of data is small with low selectivities. As you go along, you get other plans, the sequencing, the join sequencing changes, the join algorithms change, and you get plans like P3, P4, and P5 here. Okay? So now what we did is to say that let's extend the behavior of each of these plans, because what you saw in the previous picture was the infimum of all those curves. Let's extend each plan and see how it behaves over the entire space. So you see that P1 is very good initially, then becomes progressively worse. This is on a log scale and so on. Whereas this green plan that you see here is good at the very end, but it has a huge initial cost, so it's very high here. So now if you look at each of these plans, in the next picture what I'm showing you is that what is the worst case behavior that you could have had with your native query optimizer. This is the ideal. This is your worst case. How do you figure out the worst case? So what you say is that let me go to each location here and see what is the worst selectivity estimation that I could do with regard to the suboptimality that I'll have because I'm using the wrong plan. So for example, if I'm located here, let's say I'd estimated the query to be only 1%, but to my horror, so this is at compile time, at runtime to my horror it turns out to be 99%, which means I'm going to be using P1, the nested loops join algorithm, at P5 where ideally I should have been using hash joins. So here you can calibrate it that the suboptimality of using red P1 at the green location would be around 20. You could also have the opposite situation where you used P5, the hash join algorithm, for a tiny amount of data. You estimated 80%, that's why you are here, but the actual was only 0.01%. So now the suboptimality is 100. And if you look at it over the entire space, the worst case suboptimality is 100 here. Okay? So now let's look at how do we design plan bouquet on this single dimensional error selectivity space, so to speak. We take the same curve that we had before, and what we do is we draw iso cost lines. That these are basically horizontal lines on the cost, which cut this, but cut this at regular intervals. There is essentially a cost ratio of 2, which is a geometric progression. And because this is on a log scale, you get them to be equidistant here. And what you do is you find the plans that are existing at the intersection of the optimal profile. This is the optimal profile with these cost steps. So in this case, it is P1 because it has these 4 intersections, then P2, P3, and P5. Notice that P4 has been dropped out of the space because it was in between 2 of these cuts, these horizontal cuts. Okay, now what do you do next? Let's say the actual selectivity of the query was 5%. We don't know this. And also remember, we said that we will never estimate because we know we'll get it wrong. So what we would do is that we would always start from close to 0 and say that I will execute this plan P1 with a budget equal to the cost that was there at the intersection of P1 with the optimal profile, which in this case was around 12,000. So I'll give you this amount of time, try to execute it and see whether you finish or not. Now if you finish, that's perfect, you are done. But in this case, you would obviously not finish because the query is actually of 5% selectivity. So what happens when you don't finish? You actually throw away all these results of P1. Then you say, let me execute P1 with the next level, which is a doubling of the budget, which is 24,000. That won't work. You do it again, doubling it, 48,000, 96,000, doesn't work. You're getting very panicky. You execute now P2 because you have now come to this situation here. This is with 190,000. That also won't work. Execute P3. And now this time it will work. Although the budget you had given here was 380,000, it will actually finish with 340,000. How do you know this? This is because of the monotonicity requirement. So it tells you that if this plan could be, with this amount of data, could be completed in 380,000 units of time, then any point below it would also be completed in the same or lesser amount of time. Okay? So this is where we are bringing the geometry into the picture. So now if you look at the overall cost that we incurred, you can just add up all the trial and error things, 12,000, 24,000, and so on. If you do all of this, you get 710,000. So compared to the ideal, so if you already knew the value was 5%, you would have only have spent this cost which was here, which was 340,000. 710 by 340 would give you 2.1. And you can do some optimizations on this and get it down to 1.8. Okay? So this is our technique. Now I can do the same thing over the entire selectivity space. And what you find is you get this blue line, which is between the red and green, and actually much closer to the green. Okay? So the worst case here would be in the center, where you get maximum suboptimality is just 3.1. So now you might think that this is an artifact of where you have cherry-picked a certain situation, where you did very well compared to the 100 of Postgres or the industrial strength query optimizer, and you only got 3.1. But actually I can show you in the next is that you can actually show that this is universally true. Why? Because the cost that we are incurring is essentially the cost of each of these ISO cost cuts that we had, 12, 24, 48, and so on. This was a geometric progression. We had 2 there, but in general it could be A plus AR and so on. This is the summation of the geometric progression. What is the minimum cost that the ideal optimizer, which had complete knowledge of all the selectivities, would have required? It would be lower bounded by this value here. Because if it had been less than this value, then this itself would have been sufficient. Because of monotonicity, you would have stopped at that point. So only if it is in between these 2 points would you actually have to jump to the next location. So you basically are trying to find a place and you're jumping with steps of 2, doubling of 2. So the minimum value would be lower bounded by AR to the power k minus 2. So now your worst case suboptimality would be take this summation and normalize it with this value. And if you do that with some trivial algebra, you can show that it's upper bounded by r squared over r minus 1. So r is the common ratio that you're using to do the jumping across the query, isocost lines. What is interesting here is now there's no dependency on k. It does not depend on where you are located on the selectivity line. And you can easily show that it reaches the minima at r equal to 2, which is why we had shown 2 in the earlier slides. This results in a maximum suboptimality of 4. Now you might say that, well, 4 is good enough for Indian Institute of Science, but there are other institutions where maybe we could get it down to 3 or 2, maybe, right? But actually that's not the case. We could also prove that this is the best performance achievable by any deterministic online algorithm. With randomized algorithms, you can of course do a little better, but in the world of determinism, this is the best that you can do. So at this stage, you might say, well, 4 is still bad compared to 1, right? But what I would like to point out is that previously we had the situation where you were making spectacular errors, where the plan costs were 10 times, 100 times, 10,000 times, and so on. So what we have done is to take a problem that was, or a situation that was absolutely terrible and converted into something that is mildly horrible. That's the change that we have made. Okay? So now you might have asked what would happen if you had multiple dimensions, not just one. The machinery becomes much more complex, the analysis is far harder, so I won't bore you with that here, you can look up the papers. But the nice result is that if you had d dimensions space, you can give a guarantee that it will always be essentially within a quadratic factor, d squared plus 3d. And those numbers that you see here are the worst case behaviors. So again, as I said, 40 might look large, saying that you're 40 times slower than the ideal, but that's better than being 10,000 times slower than the ideal. Okay? You can also show a nice geometric proof that there is a lower bound of which is linear for any discovery algorithm in this class. And for certain types of queries where the join graph is, for example, chain and so on, you can also bring it to linearity there. Okay. And the other important point here is that this does not depend on the platform. It just depends on what is the kind of behavior, on how many dimensions do you expect within your query where you are making selectivity estimations, how many such dimensions do you think would be potentially erroneous? Okay. So if you want to read a lot more about this, there is a survey that I wrote which was published last year. So this came out in the FNT databases series. Okay, so now I'll switch to the Indian database industry. So in the early years, that is certainly before 2000, most of the work done in India was limited to maintenance, documentation, and support. So all the boring peripheral kind of services were being offered from here. It was being outsourced to India and saying that you guys do the testing and bug fixing and so on. You do the maintenance of the software, write the documents and stuff like this. And also what was the situation here is that people had knowledge of tools, but they did not have understanding of the system internals. So this is very similar to how you might know how to drive the vehicle, although many of you might be questioning that, having seen Bangalore traffic, you are worried about that. Angela was telling me that when she came here, by mistake, the driver took her to the Hilton Hotel instead of Sheraton. And she said, well, there's a mistake, turn around and get there. That required a long U-turn to come around. So the driver took the easy route. He just turned his car around right there, came in the opposite direction of traffic, honking his horn in red, and reached here, okay? She survived that experience, okay? So you may know how to drive the vehicle, but you are not the mechanical engineer who knows how the internal combustion is working under the hood. Okay? So this was certainly true. Then in 2003, Sudarshan and I gave a one-week crash course for engineers from the HP group, which was in Bangalore here in 2003, and then they actually went for a longer refresher course in California. Several of our students also went to Pune because at that time they helped build the Sybase had also moved its, in a sense, engineering unit to the Cyber City in Pune. So they helped build the Sybase ASC during 2004 and 10. And because of the kind of introduction of and teaching of various kinds of detailed internal mechanisms of database engines, they were actually able to work in these core areas, whereas earlier they had been limited to the peripheral kind of services. What is the situation today? You have several teams working on query optimizers, execution engines, storage engines, all the nuts and bolts, the nitty-gritty of it, distribute SQL, control, and so on. For example, Google's Napa and Alloy DB, both the core DB and the distributor platform have been heavily engineered in Bangalore here now. Okay? So this all requires serious software chops, and the engineers here do have it now. Okay? We also have Aurora, PostgreSQL, there's Oracle Cloud, Teradata, Yugabyte DB. Some of these are also our sponsors here. Then we have Persistent Systems led by Anand Deshpande, who is also the sponsorship chair for our conference. Okay? They are a remarkably successful company. They worked in 3 verticals. One is in the fintech industry, then the healthcare, and also as well as in software. 10 billion market cap, okay? Completely transformed the world of software engineering, especially in the database context. We also have a very successful PG conference here, which is the kind of open source database contributions from India. And this has been largely led by Pawan Devlasi, who was also our publicity chair. You would have seen him earlier in the conference and also through many emails and who messages. In this year, there were over 570 attendees, roughly 70 speakers, and over 50 technical talks. And what is important is the agenda. It was not just services and saying, how do I use databases? It was deep dives into internals. Lots of discussion about concurrency control, transactions, recovery, and so on. It would make Mohan's heart go wild, saying, hey, these guys are doing the great stuff. Okay, this is literally in the bowels of the system. Okay? Performance tuning, GIS platforms, multi-master replication, the whole works. So I'll just give you as an exemplar. All the companies have similar things here. Microsoft has a India Development Center on SQL. This was spearheaded by Karthik Ramchandra, who had done his PhD in IIT Bombay Sudarshan, then went and worked in the Jim Gray lab for a couple of years, then came back. So he started this group and noticed that this in the space of 5 years, he has done this remarkable increase where you have a headcount that was close to 0 here, has reached close to 200. And all these guys are working on deep tech. Okay? This is not on the services side. And you can see that they have groups. This is all over the country. It's not just in Bangalore. You have people in, as you see here in Pune, Hyderabad, and other locations in India, Noida, and so on. Okay? So we have a good distribution of high-quality engineers who are actually very knowledgeable about the entire system stack and not just at the top layers who can do this kind of work now. So they also have key contributions in many features of SQL 25, as well as in hyperscale and other areas. What is very interesting and also surprising is that they have been able to even do the follow the sun for live site incidents, which means that as things are happening in the world, you have to react to them and get them fixed. Doing things offline is much easier, but this is basically an online thing where you're getting a call from Satya Nadella saying something's wrong, go fix it. then you have to do this in real time, but they have had the kind of experience and the abilities to actually do this and be celebrated for it. They have made contributions to the entire SQL engine, all the core things, including the OS. This is the operating system, interestingly called SOS. Okay? And then on hyperscale, compute, storage, and so on, all the 3 layers, storage, compute, and the database integration. So what is important to realize here is that we have gone from just being at the kind of the cosmetic layers of the systems to actually designing the internals of these systems. The reason I highlight this is that earlier also we had situations where foreign companies were putting up local outfits in India. And although they would on the paper say that they were peer-to-peer, that was actually not so much the case. It was really that you were finding that they were backwaters and most of the boring work from outside was being shipped here. But today they are basically punching at their own weight. They are leading projects now. Okay? It's not just following and trying to help out the others. So they have also had several innovation and collaborations, both within India with the Microsoft research groups. They're also working with the people at Redmond and GSL and so on. I'm just giving you this as an example that they are hooked into the best people in the world and they're being treated as being on par. Okay? So the last part I'll just do is on Indian database deployment. So even as late as 2009, less than 20% of Indians had a bank account, and essentially we had a parallel economy running because of this, where everything was being dealt with in cash. So there was a loss of productivity, tax revenue, and socio-economic development. In fact, 1/3 of our population, and you know our population is very large, 1.5 billion, 1/3 is a fairly serious number, did not have any identity document at all. So that is when this Aadhaar system, which Aadhaar means foundation in Hindi, came up and said that we will give everybody an identity which is based on biometrics, and they covered more than 1 billion people in just 5 years. And there's a combination of biometrics and mobile phones to ensure that nobody could question this identity. There was no paper. It was all being done on things that could not be, in a sense, repudiated by anybody else. Once they did the identity layer, which allowed you to prove, I am who I claim to be, then the next 2 layers of the stack also transformed our society. They made a payments layer where it allows you now to pay from anybody to anybody else. So pretty much nowadays, none of us carry wallets. We don't carry cash. We just have the mobile phone and we go and show it somewhere. We scan a UPI, the QR code, and then through this UPI unified payment interface, we just transfer the money. So even if you go and drink coconut water along the sidewalks here, you just pay it by the QR code. You don't have to carry money at all. And this has worked remarkably well because you can pay anyone to anyone else. It's interoperable, it's very fast, and it's cheap. And it's not just smartphones, it also works on legacy systems. And the third thing that has happened now is that going beyond payments is also for documents. So if you wanted to get, for example, a loan from a bank and you had to show that there was a collateral, that you had some property that could be used as collateral, earlier you had to go and get several documents that had to be signed by the various government officials certifying that you actually had it. Now you can do this completely online because there is a repository that authenticates and allows you to deliver it in an encrypted and confidential manner to the desired recipient, and it's always opt-in. You are in charge of it. Okay, so maybe I'll just skip this in the interest of time. I'll just talk about this last one point. Something else that is remarkable, apart from just the public deployment, is our capital markets here. So this is the stock market exchange and clearing. So we actually have the largest volume of stock market trades per day in the world. This is the National Stock Exchange in Mumbai. Sudarshan was closely associated with it for the last 6 years. He was the chair of the technology committee. And I was working on the clearing side. So the exchange is the front end, which does the matching of trades. The clearing agency, which is the back end, does the actual settlement with the banks and the depositories. And in fact, on June 5th, 2024, the reason that this date was important is just today, essentially, is that this happened just after the election results came. And there was a boom in stock market trades. They had 20 billion orders and 300 million transactions, about 1 million messages per second, and the system worked beautifully without going down. Okay? So the highly performant systems, they're also robust, they are fair, they're transparent, and they're very heavily regulated. Unlike most other countries, with the regulator in India is very careful that small investors should not get affected. It's not saying that you were greedy, you wanted money, you got screwed, go look after yourself. Here the government does try to look after the small investors. Very interesting is that how many days after you made the trade does the actual settlement take place? In India, we have had T+1 settlement, saying you did the trade today on the exchange, it got settled the next day. This was in 2022. Even the US did this only in 2024. And Europe and Australia and Japan are still in T+2. So you do the trade, but the actual transfer occurs after a couple of days. And what is amazing is that since about 2 years back, we actually rolled out T+0, which is the same day settlement. Okay? This, you might say China also has this, but that's restricted to shares, whereas we do it for both shares and cash. So this means that it's not just that we are following others, this is actually occupying a leadership position in this. The disaster recovery is less than 45 minutes between Mumbai and Chennai. So that is the primary data center is in Mumbai. The recovery is in Chennai, because the assumption is that even if there's an earthquake, it will probably go through the country and both sides will not go down simultaneously. We also have a unique software as interoperability model where even if the National Stock Exchange goes down, it can ask its supposed competitor to actually take over the risk management for it, which is the Bombay Stock Exchange. This has been mandated by the regulator. So which means that even though if I have faulty software, that same faulty software will be both at the primary center and the recovery side. So I can now outsource it to a sister organization, so to speak, and they can take care of it while I fix my problems. Okay? This is a unique system that's not there anywhere else in the world today. So to wind up, I hope I was able to kind of give you a very quick historical review that once you have institutional growth, where you have a large number of institutions who can actually teach you deep systems, you also have supported this with industrial capability. So most of our digital infrastructure is extremely good. I hope our civic infrastructure also gets to meet it someday, but at least on the digital front, I think we are really doing very well. And because we have done it at scale, complete nationwide deployment, and in India, any deployment at scale means that straight away 1 billion plus people, which is really huge. This has combined to transform a scenario which was once very limited research footprint into today what is a multi-layered database ecosystem which really has global impact, and not just impact but leadership also, which is something that we are sadly lacking earlier. But today we actually have the confidence to say that I can do better than the rest of the world. And of course there has been real grassroots societal reach. Even the street hawkers and vendors, everybody uses the UPI payment interface. And behind all this is database technology. So with that, I'll thank you for your patient listening, and I hope that I was able to give you some sense of the transition that has occurred in India on the database front, and many of you have been part of it. So we are very grateful for this contributions that have been made by such a large group. And again, very grateful to the SIGMOD Executive Council for allowing us to and trusting us to host SIGMOD in Bengaluru for the first time. Thank you.
So we are at the end of the talk, but we still have maybe time for 1-2 questions. So feel free to use the microphones again that are spread in the room.
I guess
Yes.
one question would be...
Maybe speak up a bit.
Yeah, one question would be that we've been in the database ecosystem for so long. When would we really see a large-scale database system coming out from India? I'm doing a little bit, but your thoughts on that would be really helpful.
Right. So I think the main issues here is that you can build database systems with regard to the internals, but often the reason that you won't succeed is because you not built all these other related database components. For example, the schema advisor, the index advisor, and all that. The technology and the expertise to create them is also there. But it also means you need deep pockets, because this is a long enterprise. You cannot build a database system overnight. You can't go to LLM and say, wipe coding and saying, give me the world's greatest database system overnight, right? So there is a huge volume of code that has to be written and tested, because we also have very strict guarantees that need to be followed. So if you need to do it, you need something where you're going for the long run. And to some extent, I would also blame our Indian funding agencies, since Shiv Kumar Kalyanaraman is not here. We make a very bad mistake. We don't trust in people initially. We always are looking over the shoulder and saying, what are you doing? So for most of our government projects, every 3 months there is a project review saying, how much did you accomplish in 3 months? In research, you know that you may not accomplish something for a year, but then get a eureka moment where you transform the world. So what I was always telling the government is, give me the money for this project and go away. Don't come back. Wait for 5 years. At the end of it, come and look at the project. We'll give you a report. If I've done well, continue funding again. You don't have to do anything else. If I have done badly, curse my ancestors and then don't give me money again. But we have this short-term mentality of saying that, what did you do yesterday for me? And I think there is a mindset problem in Indian bureaucracy. All the visa people know this at a very close quarters. We don't have the right attitude towards research. That it is something that where you have to bet on the long-term implications, make many wrong mistakes, but one good one will completely transform your society, because even the other mistakes will pale into comparison with the success that you had.
Yeah. Can I ask a follow-up?
Let's go with Mohan.
Sorry. Super impressive presentation, and as you all know, I've regularly tracked what's going on in India. So I've always admired guys like you and Sudarshan and a few others who took that giant leap into India when things were not so clear. So I'm very happy to see all the stuff that you described and everything. The one question that I keep worrying about is, are we able to scale things? Yeah, there are these pockets of places, activities and so on. The point of comparison is really China. The number of PhDs, the number of papers, the number of products, product people even writing research track papers and so on. When do you think, roughly obviously, India will reach a stage where it has this comparable level of scaling of these pockets that are doing fantastic work? This has always bothered me a bit.
Yeah, so that's a very valid question, and the usual NP hard problem that certainly when we compare with China, we have no comparison at all. We have to state up front. I think that is partially because although on the surface we say that we celebrate the academic world, in reality that's not so. In the sense that very few people come into the academic world today because they're interested in it. For most of them it's a job, especially at the second and third tier institutions. So what is happening is that you have a top layer which is very good and they do it because they love it, but it falls very steeply after that. So if you're looking at your second and third level institutions, none of them are teaching good internals. They're all just saying that, can you get a job in the software industries market? And if you can get it in services, then you are good for life, because now you are getting a huge salary, at least in terms of the Indian context, and you're going to be set for life.
Right.
In a way, the advent of LLMs may actually be good for us. It might wipe out the bottom part of the software industry and force people to start thinking. Because now you don't have easy solutions now. You have to put in the chops to get understanding well. So if you are just somebody who has skimmed through the courses, obviously not survive, because it is going to do it much better and without spelling mistakes, right? So I actually am welcoming the advent of LLMs and wiping out of the bottom layer of the software industry, because most of them are there just because it's a job. But if you want to do serious stuff in the academic institutions, then they need to have a push to ensure that their students are trained well enough that they actually can do good work, rather than just saying, I got a job in the software industry, and then, as they say, life is jingalala after that. Right?
See, the other distinction I keep making is, even though you quoted all those foreign companies setting up shop here and doing hardcore stuff, when is the local industry? If you look at Alibaba, ByteDance, it's a long list, Huawei and so on. When are we going to get to that level of deep development by local companies that are not just branches of foreign companies?
Okay. So Karsten told me to give a short answer. Whenever the next SIGMOD is scheduled here, by then it will be done. So there's...
Right. Let's thank Jayant again for the great talk.
Thank you very much.
We immediately continue with the next point on our schedule, which is the business meeting, and therefore Angela is coming to the stage.